Hey guys, what's up? It's Eric with Advanced Level Automotive. Welcome back to another video. Welcome back to another case study. I just got to work this morning, but on the way to work, I actually was having some issues with my personal vehicle. And maybe some of you guys already know this Dodge Nitro right behind me. It's a 2007 Dodge Nitro with a 3.7 liter 6-cylinder engine. I made a video a month or two ago about this. Had a cylinder number 6 misfire. Turned out it just needed an ignition coil, so we replaced the coil. Truck's been driving okay since then, but like I said, on my way to work this morning, this thing started misfiring really bad. It was smoking out of the tailpipe and it smelled a lot like fuel. So anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and hook up the scan tool and see if we got any codes. All right guys, so we are inside the vehicle. I've got my AutoLink scan tool. I'm gonna go ahead and hook it up. But I figured while we have a minute, just want to tell you guys a little backstory about this vehicle and why I'm stuck driving a Dodge Nitro right now. I think I might have mentioned it in my last video, but I didn't really give you a backstory because I know some of you guys might be questioning, like, why would an auto mechanic or someone who's knowledgeable in the automotive field ever drive a Dodge or Chrysler product? And that's because, you know, it's very well known that the quality and the reliability of these vehicles really isn't that great, especially the 3.7 motor. Now, I'm sorry to anyone who's a Chrysler fan, anyone who's a Dodge Jeep fan. I know they're nice looking vehicles, but as far as the build quality, these vehicles are just really subpar. I hate to say that, but that's just kind of the way it is, man. I mean, you really can't deny that Chrysler products aren't probably some of the worst vehicles that you can own if you're looking for reliability. Anyways, guys, to get to the story, this vehicle actually belonged to a customer of mine, and she brought it in because it was having a misfire on cylinder number 5. And so after a quick diagnosis, we were able to determine that the engine had a blown head gasket. We removed the cylinder head. Definitely we found evidence of the blown head gasket, so we went ahead and we put an estimate together for the lady. And I mean, when I say we put an estimate together, I mean, we gave her a really fair price. Like, I wasn't trying to overcharge her or anything, but anyways, I gave her the price. And after a couple days of contemplating it, she actually decided that she didn't want to put any more money into this vehicle because she had only owned it for about 3 years. And in the time that she's owned the vehicle, she said that she's had to do some major repairs and she just got tired of having to sink money into this thing. And just a side note, I wasn't her original mechanic. This was actually the first time I was dealing with this lady. I was actually recommended to her by a friend, so she I guess she felt like the shop that she was at before really wasn't, you know, doing her right. And anyway, she brought it over here. Like I said, we found out it had a blown head gasket. She just was tired of putting money into the vehicle, and so she decided she was just gonna junk it. You know, I even tried giving her the option of you know, just letting us put it back together so she can drive it out of here, but she didn't even want to pay for us to put it back together. She just wanted to pay our teardown fee, which was only a few $100s for teardown and diagnostic. So she did pay us for the teardown and the diagnostic. She called one of those junk vehicle buyers, and over the phone they told her they were going to give her $500, and she said okay. So she called them. She came over to the shop and she was waiting on them to come pick up the vehicle. And really at that point, I felt like, I mean, if she was really ready to get rid of the vehicle, I thought it was probably maybe a perfect opportunity for me to just kind of offer to buy the vehicle from her because it was already in my shop. You know, we took it apart. They're only offering her $500. I mean, if I offer her something like $600 and she takes it, you know, all I got to do is put a new head gasket on, put the cylinder head back on, and I only paid $600 for a running vehicle. So that's what I did. I offered her $600. She called the junk vehicle buyer back and she told him to cancel. And she ended up selling the vehicle to me for $600, which, you know, I thought it was a good deal because $600 for a nice looking vehicle, I mean, it's not a bad deal. And I thought, you know, well, this is probably a perfect opportunity for me to get into maybe buying and selling some vehicles. You know, of course, running a business, running a shop, you know, you're always trying to figure out how to make money different ways because, you know, sometimes auto repair can be really slow pay. I mean, unless you're doing a lot of quick in and out work like brake jobs and strut jobs, you know, sometimes we don't get any of that. Sometimes we're stuck doing jobs that are just, they take a long time, you know, jobs like replacing a transmission or doing an engine or replacing turbos, you know, things like that. Like, those are jobs that take a lot of time and they pay, but it just takes a while to pay. Anyway, like I said, I thought maybe this is probably a good opportunity to get into buying and selling cars. I only pay $600 for the truck. You know, let's get it put back together and see if we can't maybe sell this thing. So that was my idea. Now here comes the interesting part of the story. At the time, I had somebody working for me that really wasn't working too well for me, because this guy, I mean, everything that he touched, he seemed to just mess it up. I mean, I don't know if have you ever known anyone that everything they touch, they fuck it up. And I mean, the thing is that I really tried to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I'm a really nice guy, so I really kind of dragged it on for probably a lot longer than I should have, because it really got to the point to where I didn't really want him working on customers' vehicles anymore, because he was just costing me too much money. I would put him to do a job and he would end up breaking something, and then the job would take twice as long, and then it would cost twice as much, and then I would lose money. So I really didn't want to fire the guy. You know, I was trying to give him a chance because he was a good friend of mine. So I thought, well, you know what, we have this Dodge Nitro that we need to put back together, because he was actually the one that took it apart. So I did have him do the disassembly, removal of the cylinder head, because he said he was capable of doing it. So I was like, okay, do it. So anyways, because it got to a point that I didn't want him working on customers' vehicles, it was just me and my brother working on all the vehicles in the shop. So we were really busy. I mean, we were balls to the wall. And so I did not have time to deal with this Dodge Nitro. So I put him on it. Now that's probably the biggest mistake I could have ever made. And yes, I regret this mistake, but it happened. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I feel like I just really want to tell you guys a story, because it is a really interesting story. So anyway, I had him put the cylinder head back onto the vehicle with the new head gasket, of course. He put the timing and everything together. You know, he was able to put everything together, and we got the vehicle running. So when I went to start the vehicle up, started up, ran fine, man, I was happy. So I started to pull the truck out of the shop, and while I was pulling the truck out of the shop, I heard some really loud, ugly grinding noise, and then all of a sudden the truck shut off. So I thought, man, this can't be good. So anyways, I had to go in there. We had to remove the valve covers to figure out where the hell that noise was coming from. And it turns out that this guy forgot to torque down one of the camshaft gears. So what ended up happening was that when I started it up, it ran just fine, but then the bolt on the camshaft gear started to back out, and then the gear actually came away from the camshaft, and then what it ended up doing was it sheared the pin off of the camshaft, and it just grinded into the camshaft, and it caused so much damage. Like 3 or 4 different valves got bent. So we had to take everything back apart. I had to buy a new camshaft. We had to replace like 3 or 4 different intake and exhaust valves on a couple different cylinders, and we had to put everything back together. So keep in mind, I wasn't doing any of this work. I was trusting that, okay, he made a mistake, I'll let him slide. Let's get the new camshaft, let's get the new valves, let's get everything put back together, and let's get this thing running. And to be honest with you, the guy actually, he just kept telling me to trust him, that it was just a mistake, you know, he won't make it again. And I think he was trying to take this as an opportunity to prove himself, which I should have nipped it in the bud a long time ago, but I didn't. So anyways, I had him take it back apart. He replaced the bent valves that were in the cylinder head, replaced the camshaft, replaced the camshaft gear, and we got everything back together, up and running, and I thought we were good to go. But I was wrong. So anyways, the day that we got the truck running, I thought, awesome. I drove it out of the shop, and actually I drove it home, and we actually had a party to go to that night. So I said, let's take the truck. My wife and I, we got in the truck, and the party, you know, was like 20 miles away, so we had to get up on the freeway. Got up on the freeway. Mind you, this is at like 8 o'clock at night, so it's already dark. And if you ever been on a freeway in Houston, Texas, I mean, people are always speeding down the freeway. It's not somewhere you want to break down, but that's exactly what happened. So we were driving down the freeway, and all of a sudden the oil pressure light came on. And I thought, oh man, this can't be good. So I tried to exit off of the freeway, but before I could exit, the engine actually locked up on me. And I mean, the engine stalled, it was locked up. We were stuck on the side of the freeway. I had to call a tow truck. It was a pretty scary ordeal. Needless to say, my wife was not happy. We had the truck towed back to the shop, and the next day I had to figure out what was going on. So anyways, after tearing it back down, I actually had my brother do the inspection on it because I knew I could trust my brother. And what he actually found out was on the timing chain tensioners, the bolts that the guy had put on there were not the correct length. They were too long. So the chain tensioners were not sealing up against the block. It was causing like a really big internal oil leak. And when I confronted the guy about it, he was like, oh, you know, I misplaced the bolts and I just had to get some bolts out of the bolt bin that we had in the back of the shop. And he said, I thought these bolts would fit. But the problem was when he was tightening it down, the bolt bottomed out inside because it was a little bit too long and it wasn't actually pressing the tensioner up against the cylinder block. So it was losing a lot of oil pressure internally. Anyways, the extent of the damage was pretty bad. I mean, when we pulled the valve cover off, the camshaft on the driver's side cylinder head had completely melted. And what I mean by that is that the caps that actually bolt down the camshaft had gotten so hot from not having any lubrication, they actually snapped and broke off. So that cylinder head was fucked. And that was actually the same cylinder head that we had replaced the gasket on. Anyways, at that point, you know, I was trying to decide what to do. I really wanted to get the vehicle up and running because I figured, you know, hey, if I put, you know, a few more $100s into it, you know, I can at least try to break even or I didn't want to lose out on this thing, which I probably should have stopped there, but I didn't. Anyways, I ended up buying another cylinder head, which we found at a salvage yard. So we're gonna go ahead and put that on there. But again, guys, to be honest with you, I mean, my brother and I at the time were just so busy with other jobs that we had to finish. I didn't have time to actually work on the Nitro myself. And I didn't want to take my brother, who was doing other work that was making us money, to come work on the Nitro. So again, I had this conversation with the guy, you know, who was working on this truck, and you know, he told me that he was sorry. You know, once again, he said, you know, let me fix it for you. I want to get it right. He said, please just give me an opportunity to prove myself. I want to show you that I can do it. And so I said, fine, you know, let's try it one more time. So I let him put it back together. My head hurts just thinking about it. Let me tell you what happened next. This guy was installing the camshaft onto the cylinder head that we had just bought, and he was torquing down the camshaft caps that hold down the camshaft to the cylinder head. And he went over to the computer, pulled up the torque spec on all data, and it said 98 inch-pounds. That was the torque spec for those little bolts that hold down the caps to the camshaft. Tell me why this idiot sets the torque wrench foot-pound and then attempts to torque down the little 10mm bolts that hold down the camshaft to 98 foot-pound torque. What do you think happened? Of course the bolt broke. Oh, idiot. Anyway, so at that point, we had a broken bolt inside of the cylinder head. And mind you, these cylinder heads are aluminum. And when I say they're aluminum, I don't know what aluminum Dodge or Chrysler uses, but that stuff is soft. I mean, the cylinder head on this thing is a really soft aluminum. We tried to drill that piece of broken bolt out of the cylinder head, but we just could not. I mean, it just ended up going sideways, and all we ended up doing was ruining the cylinder head that we had just purchased. So we had to find another cylinder head. Now this is where things got really interesting, because if you know anything about these 3.7 motors, these cylinder heads love to drop the valve seats. So I actually sent this guy who was working on the truck to pretty much every salvage yard here in Houston, Texas, trying to look for a good cylinder head. And everywhere he went, every single cylinder head that he found had a drop valve seat. So at a certain point, I had to just decide to buy a cylinder head with a drop valve seat. Anyways, we bought the cylinder head with the drop valve seat. I sent it off to the machine shop. I had them install new valve seats and refurbish the cylinder head. At this point, I had already put more money into this truck than I really was intending to do, but I felt like there was no turning back at this point. So anyways, we got the refurbished cylinder head back from the machine shop, and I had the guy reinstall the cylinder head on the motor. Now during the process of him putting the engine back together this time, I was really having to babysit him. And let me tell you, this guy has some anger issues. He's not patient. He's very rough with everything he works on, which is probably why he breaks everything he touches. So anyways, during the process of him putting it back together, I was watching him every step of the way, because at this point I really couldn't have anything else go wrong with this truck. And this is where I found myself multiple times having to try to calm this guy down, because he would go to try to remove something and it wouldn't come out, and he would just wrestle it, try to wrestle things to come off. You know, for example, the crank pulley. You know, he had the puller on the crank pulley and he was trying to remove it, but he couldn't get the puller to line up properly, and so he was just fighting with it and tugging on it and trying to manhandle that thing out of there. Anyways, in that process, he actually ended up putting a hole in the radiator with the puller that he was using to try to pull the harmonic balancer off, because he couldn't get it on there right. And so he decided to take it back off, but when he was taking it off, in his frustration and anger, he yanked it off, and the end of the puller actually put a hole in the damn radiator. And at that point, I hit my limit. I couldn't handle it anymore. I said, I'm sorry. Don't touch this truck ever again. Don't touch any other vehicle in my shop again. I really tried to give this guy a chance, but it's just costing me way too much money, way too much headache. I just can't do it anymore. You gotta go. So anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up getting rid of him. I had to have my brother put the engine back together. Of course, we had to replace the radiator as well. But after my brother put it back together, I mean, the truck was running fine. Everything after that, I no longer had any issues. And to be honest with you, I really wish I would have just put my brother to do it to begin with, because I know my brother would have done a good job. He's very thorough at what he does. I mean, I taught him everything he knows as far as wrenching on cars. So anyways, guys, that's the backstory to this vehicle. I don't really want to go into any more detail. You guys get the idea. I ended up spending way more money and time into this vehicle than what it was worth. This was supposed to be an easy, put the cylinder head back on, get the vehicle running, and flip it, make some money, and move on. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way. And now I'm kind of stuck driving this thing until I can get a buyer to give me what I want. Anyways, guys, let's get back to the diagnosis. I got the scan tool hooked up. Let's check it out and see what we got. All right, guys, so I've got my scan tool over here. I'm just using the auto link just to do a quick code scan. The ignition is on. We have 2 codes. Let's see what we got. Read codes, stored codes. A PO 420. That's not good. This thing's probably going to need a catalytic converter. Let's see what other code we have. And there we have it. A PO 306. Cylinder number 6 misfire detected. Okay, cylinder number 6. If you guys watched my previous video with this vehicle, that was actually the same cylinder that it had a misfire on, and I ended up replacing the coil. Now that, I think, was probably like a month or 2 ago, and the vehicle's been driving fine since then. I mean, it's highly unlikely that that brand new coil has a problem. So let's go under the hood. Let's check it out. All right, guys, so moving under the hood, I've already done a preliminary visual check to make sure that we didn't have, you know, something as simple as an unplugged coil or an unplugged injector, but the connectors here look tight, so I don't think our problem's going to be that simple. Now, as far as the next step, I mean, there's a few different things that we can do. You know, we could probably try swapping coils, or we can probably try doing a drop test, but I think the first thing I want to do, because it's really easy, is I want to see if I can get a secondary ignition waveform pattern off of these ignition coils, because if you pay attention, these coils are actually 2-wire coils. Now, you've heard me talk about this in other videos, where ignition coils that have 2 wires, the transistor driver is not built into the coil. The transistor driver is actually built into the engine computer, which is located right here. So the nice thing about this style of ignition coil is that we can actually read the secondary ignition waveform pattern by looking at the control wire on the primary ignition. Now, if you pay attention, these 2 wires, one of these 2 wires is going to be the same color on all of the coils, and that's going to be the main power feed. So if you look, I believe this wire right here, which is a brown wire, is the same color wire on all of these coils. So that's going to be the power feed. And what we want to look at is going to be the control wire, which is this wire right here, which we're going to be looking at cylinder number 6, which is back here. The cylinder number 6, this wire looks like green and orange. So we're going to go ahead and back probe this control wire and see if we can get a waveform. All right, guys, so I've got my lab scope over here. As you can see, I have my back probe on that control wire. I'm going to go ahead and start the vehicle. All right, guys, I just went to crank this thing for the first time, and what I noticed is that it had a really extended cranking time. So let me see if I can show you that again. I don't know if you can hear that, but this thing had a pretty extended crank. Let's go back under the hood. So we're back under the hood, and I can definitely smell what smells like fuel or gasoline fumes coming from the tailpipe. So anyways, we got our back probe. Let's try to do this as quickly as possible, because we want to minimize any damage that can happen to the catalytic converters. I'm going to go ahead and try to adjust this waveform, see if we can get a good visual on it. Let me go ahead and set a trigger for it. Let's zoom in. Let me move over that trigger. I'm going to bring down the 0 line. Just going to try to do this quickly. All right, so now we can see the secondary ignition waveform pattern. Now what I want you to pay attention to is the peak on the spark line right here. So you'll see that the peak on the spark line is actually up high. So let me go ahead and just freeze this picture right here. And then I'm gonna go ahead and shut the vehicle off. All right guys, so I just shut the vehicle off. Again, we don't wanna continue to run the vehicle with the misfire like this, especially because I smell a lot of fuel coming out of the tailpipe. I know we already have a code for a catalytic converter, so it's probably gonna need a cat anyway, but I don't want to deteriorate this cat any more than it already has been. So anyways, let's take a look at this capture right here. You'll see this is the secondary ignition waveform pattern we were looking at. Again, I wanted you to pay attention to the firing line right here, and then pay attention to the spark line. Now this spark line right here, if you look, is actually pretty high. It's pretty much equaling the firing line. So this right here is an indication of a no fuel misfire. Scroll through the history, take a look. You'll see this one right here, same thing. I'm just kind of scrolling back in time here. This is a captured image. At this point right here, this is what the waveform should look, something like this, where that spark line is lower than that firing line. Let's keep scrolling back, see if we can find another one. See that one there? Looks pretty normal. Let's go ahead and keep scrolling through, see if we can find another one. Hopefully you guys can see. Sorry about the glare on the screen. But again, if you look at this one, you'll see that high spark line. Again, I'm just gonna kind of scroll through, just trying to give you guys different examples of what to look for. Again, seeing this again. Keep scrolling. You see this one right here? We have that high spark line. This is also an indication of a no fuel or a fuel misfire. So, I mean, I could keep going, show you a couple of them. I just want to give you different examples. Look at that one right there. Again, you see that high spark line? You don't want to see this. When you see this, this is an indication of a misfire due to a fueling problem. So I think right now, just by looking at this waveform, we can determine that more than likely we don't have a problem with the ignition coil. We more than likely have a problem with the fuel injector. Now, I think that makes sense because we also had an extended crank period. So it is possible that this injector might be leaking. And what I mean by that is whenever you shut the vehicle off, the fuel pressure in the fuel rail should stay pretty constant. Now, if you have a bad fuel injector that's stuck open, it's going to be leaking down that pressure in the fuel rail, and that's going to cause you to have an extended crank whenever you go to start it up. So I think the next thing we need to do is check that fuel injector. And there's probably a couple different ways we can do that, but I think what I want to do, because it's pretty easy to gain access to the fuel injectors, is we're going to go ahead and do a fuel injector balance test. Now, in order to do the fuel injector balance test, we need to let this engine cool off, because what we don't want to do is try to run this test with the fuel rail hot, because that can cause our readings to be off. And the reason for that is because whenever you release the fuel pressure in the fuel rail, it can cause the fuel to vaporize, which will throw off our readings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit for an hour or so, let the fuel rail completely cool off, and then we'll start with our fuel injector balance test. All right guys, so I've got my setup ready to do an injector balance test. If you look over here, we have the scan tool, it's connected. We're going to be using this to command the fuel pump relay on. And if you look down here, we have the fuel pressure gauge. And this fuel pressure gauge, we have it connected directly to the fuel rail. There's a Schrader valve right here. This is where our hose is connected. And over here I have the electronic fuel injector tester. What this tester does is it allows us to command the injectors to pulse. And what we're going to use this for is to test how much fuel each injector is flowing. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go ahead and activate the fuel pump. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring us to our resting pressure. Once we reach our resting pressure, we're going to activate the tool at each injector, and we're going to watch to see how much pressure drops from the resting pressure. So we're going to do this one injector at a time, and then we're going to compare how much of a pressure difference there is between the 3 injectors on this bank. So let's go ahead and move over to the scan tool. All right, so hopefully you guys can see the setup we have. I'm going to go ahead and command the fuel pump relay to come on. We don't need any data PIDs. All right, so we are inside of the active test. It says F1 to turn the fuel pump on and F2 to turn it off. So pay attention to the gauge. We're gonna get this to reach the resting pressure. You see it's going up to 60 PSI. Then we'll go ahead and shut it off and see where the resting pressure is. and that does not look good. Okay, that should not be happening. We should not be losing all our pressure. Let me double check my connections here. Make sure I'm not leaking fuel anywhere. No, we're not leaking any fuel. Okay. Let's try that one more time. We'll see if we can get this thing to reach a resting pressure. Hit F1. You can see it goes up to 60 psi. I'm gonna go ahead and shut it off. And this thing should only drop maybe about 5 psi, but you can see this gauge is going all the way down to 0. So it definitely looks like we have some type of fuel leak. Now I think at this point it would be pretty easy to say that we probably have a bad fuel injector. Maybe that fuel injector on the number 6 misfiring cylinder is stuck open, and what's happening is that it's just dumping fuel into the number 6 cylinder, and that's probably what's causing it to misfire, which, I mean, it makes sense because it's not holding resting pressure in the fuel rail, and that may be why we have an extended crank. I mean, I was really hoping to show you guys the fuel injector balance test using my little tool, but at this point we really can't even run the test because we can't even hold resting pressure. So at this point, I think the next step we need to do is go ahead and unbolt the fuel rail, pressurize the system, and then see if that fuel injector is leaking. So let me go ahead and unbolt this fuel rail. All right guys, so I've got the fuel rail unbolted. It was actually pretty easy to do. There's only 4 screws holding down this fuel rail. I'm gonna go ahead and pop it up. Just gonna grab this thing. Oh, actually, check that out. Pay attention to that number 6 fuel injector. I'm gonna lift up on this fuel rail. Just pay attention to that fuel injector. There is a bunch of fuel in there. I think I'm gonna have to remove these coils to get this fuel rail off completely. All right guys, so I went ahead and removed the ignition coils. As you can see, I already have the fuel rail all the way raised up. It's pretty evident where our problem is. If you look down, these are the holes where the fuel injectors go. If you look at this back one, you can see it's actually full of gasoline. So I'm not sure if the intake valve is closed or not. If it's closed, then that means the cylinder head is just full with fuel. If that intake valve is open, then that means the entire cylinder is full of gasoline. So definitely we're gonna need to remove the spark plug and crank the engine over so that we can blow all this gasoline out of the cylinder, because we don't want to hydrolock the engine. If you look up here, there's the fuel injector, and it's pretty evident. I don't even think I need to pressurize this. So you can see these other fuel injectors are dry. Hopefully you guys can see these injectors are dry, and this back one over here is still dripping. So like I said, I really don't think I need to pressurize it, but I guess just to show you guys, I'm gonna go ahead and do it. I've got the scan tool over here. I'm gonna command the fuel pump on. I'm only gonna do it for a second because I'm pretty sure this thing's gonna spray a lot of fuel. I'm gonna turn it on. All right. That fuel injector is leaking big time. Look at the fuel injector next to it. You'll see that there's no fuel coming out of this thing, and this fuel injector is just leaking like crazy. So definitely this is gonna need a fuel injector. I'm gonna go ahead and get one on order, replace it. Like I said, we're gonna need to remove the spark plug, crank the engine over to get all this gasoline out of the cylinder, and we'll go from there. All right guys, so we got the new injector installed. We're gonna go ahead and start it up. Looking at the tailpipe, it's got some smoke coming out. Probably got to burn that excessive fuel out. Run it till this thing clears out. All right, so the engine is now running smooth. No more smoke coming out of the tailpipe. Misfire is gone. We went ahead and cleared the check engine light. Check engine light is gone also. So that's definitely a fix. like I said, before we put that injector in, I went ahead and I removed the spark plug and I cranked the engine over so that we could blow the gasoline out. I really wish I would have recorded it because it actually blew out a lot of gasoline. I mean, I cranked that thing over and it just went boom. But unfortunately, I wasn't filming, so I can't show you. I'm sorry, guys. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and drive it home. It's already time for us to close up, so I'm ready to get out of here. Oh, and by the way, one more thing I forgot to add is that we are gonna have to change the oil, because I'm pretty sure with the fuel injector leaking like that, we probably have gasoline inside the engine oil, so the engine oil is going to need to get replaced. I'm probably going to have to do that tomorrow morning, but that's just one more thing on my list for this engine. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it informational. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy these case studies, please make sure to check out my channel for all the other case studies I have. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.